Hey guys, we have made it. Finally, in the flesh, not really. But this is the decade, the last decade that we have made it through, and throughout the history of time, we made it to the 2010s. Somehow, we got through that decade. And you know what? I'm very mixed on this decade when it comes to the music, because on one hand, I think music has kind of degraded so much to a point where a lot of sounds just sound generic and bland, and to some degree I guess I'm going to sound like an old curmudgeon here, but not like music. And on the other hand, it's given us some of the greatest artistic achievements ever known to man. So it's really, I'm really split on the whole decade, but it's not worse than the 80s, so there you go. But even so, I already did my 2000s video last, which was well over a month ago now, I'm pretty sure. So be sure to check that one out if you haven't already. I just got so busy with the movies and stuff, and right before Oscar season, that's how it always goes. But luckily, I'm here to bring you this list, the final entry for now, until years down the line if we're around, and we can do the 2020s. But yeah, so I'm very, very excited to talk about this decade, despite my reservations about pop music in general nowadays. There's still a lot of great stuff to talk about here, and as I said, some of the greatest albums of all time. So let's get right into it. And for my honorable mentions, what? No Casey Musgraves at all? Look, I love Casey Musgraves. She is like the patron saint of country music. And really the only one, well, not the only one, but one of the only ones making country music about something that's not beers or trucks. But she didn't quite make the cut. Very, very close, though, I will say that. Also, so was Tyler, the Creator's Igor, which, honestly, if we're talking about concept albums, I think is a better concept album than Quadrophenia. Sorry, Who fans. I love them too. But even so, there's so much. No Bob Dylan. We're gonna pass him over again this decade, just completely this time. But Tempest is a really good album. So, what could be in the top 10 then? I mean, there's so many great albums that aren't on the honorable mentions. But yeah, let's get right into it. And yeah, I can't wait to talk about these records. Now, at number 10, I have a debut album from one of the most talented artists of his generation, and one of the few artists that I feel is actually pushing music into a new direction, creating sounds that we haven't quite heard before. It all really started not necessarily with this record, but it was his debut technically, and that is Channel Orange by Frank Ocean. Yeah, this is such a great album, especially as far as debuts go. This is up there for one of the all-time best. But you know, obviously he had released Nostalgia Ultra, his first mixtape, his non-commercial mixtape, and he'd been a ghostwriter for quite a few years, and he got a lot of traction with that mixtape to the point where Don Henley had to shut it down because he sampled Hotel California. I don't even want to get into that asshole. Anyway, but basically, this was his first major studio label album, and part of him, I think he was partially locked into a sound that he felt like he couldn't escape. Like, he wanted to do more artistically after this, and obviously he kind of broke free from those shackles, if you will, because this is sort of more in the traditional R&B realm, like, you know, neo-soul, 1970s R&B. But, like, when it sounds as good as probably something off of any Stevie Wonder or Marvin Gaye album from that time period, I really don't think you can complain about this at all. Because really, that's the thing, he is like the modern day Marvin Gaye or Stevie Wonder. I mean, he's at least the closest thing we have to both of those guys in today's music. But just his voice, I mean, Frank Ocean is one of the greatest singers of all time. The way he has that really rich, deep tone, and then he can go up in his falsetto so seamlessly like there's no tomorrow. Especially on the true opening track to this album, Thinking About You, which I was so disappointed I knew from the Vine, you know, a potato flew around my room before you came. I was like, oh my goodness, I'm such an idiot. I should have known it was from this album. And what a great song it is. Easily one of the highlights on the album, especially when it's, oh, do you not think so far ahead? 'Cause I'm thinking about forever. You know, when he does, I mean, that is just one of the most beautiful displays of falsetto I've ever seen, and just the lyrics on here are so poignant. And I think that's the thing that really does it for me with this album. His use of double entendres is like bar to none better than like anybody else's right now. I mean, one of the most genius, one of the most challenging, thought-provoking songwriters of his generation. And it really comes to full effect on this album. And I don't think that is displayed on any track better than Sweet Life, where he's like talking about, you know, living in Ladera Heights, you know, and I think he's like talking about this guy who really, you know, there's so much beauty around him, but he's just kind of enveloped with all the fallacies around him and just kind of the materialistic urges of society, and just wanting to go and travel. And there's that beautiful line, it's like, why see the world when you got the beach? And tell me why see the world when you got the beach? I mean, that is just, oh my goodness, maybe the most profound line Frank Ocean has ever written on any album. And then, of course, I mean, another absolute knockout of a track, Super Rich Kids, talking about these privileged kids who get no attention from their parents, and just them kind of like trying to wander around and party aimlessly, trying to get some sort of gratification from other people who end up just using them for their money. I mean, and of course you had that amazing hook where he's just the spoken word hook where he's like, too many bottles of this wine we can't pronounce. Too many bowls of that green, no Lucky Charms. The maids come around too much. Parents ain't around enough. No, but really, I mean, it is just such a wonderful song, such great storytelling, and obviously Earl Sweatshirt's verse is great on here too. Absolute classic. I mean, there's so many great songs on here. Crack Rock, where he's talking about how, you know, like this person has just become so enveloped by their crack addiction that nobody wants to be seen with them anymore, and just how their urges kind of overwhelm them and lead them to a life of crime. I mean, this whole thing is basically essentially a concept album about kind of like portraits of teenage life and drug addiction and teenage pregnancy. I mean, there's so many things on here. Unrequited Love, especially on the beautiful track Bad Religion, where he's talking to this it is presumed some sort of a Middle Eastern taxi driver, as you'd expect, you know, somewhere like New York City, and how he's like saying this prayer for him and kind of like trying to get him to pray away his unrequited love for this man who's a bad religion to him. He says a one-man cult. I just think is such a brilliant line. Beautiful ballad on here. But then you also have tracks like Lost, which is just so beautiful. The synths on there, wow, wow, wow. Just the message where he's like with this girl and he's like using her to kind of like push these drug deals, and then how he's like saying, you know, we were going to cook. I promise you'd cook in the kitchen or whatever, and he's like kind of talking about, you know, making a life later on, but also talking about like cooking crack and stuff and transporting it over the borderlines. Yet again, just such a magnificent use of double entendre in the song. But really, I don't think, the songwriting wise, it really gets more grandiose or ambitious than on Pyramids, where he's like talking about Cleopatra and how this black woman was kind of like this symbol of beauty and elegance, and just how they viewed her as a goddess back in those days, and kind of like how he goes from like the pyramids in Egypt to the pyramids in Vegas, where basically Cleopatra is now the name of the stripper, and he's like signifying the degradation of a black woman. I mean, it is absolutely brilliant. A 9-minute song, but it's just the storytelling on it's amazing. The soundscapes that he creates on here is just incredible. And of course you have even features from John Mayer and Andre 3000, who I think, believe it or not, is one of the weakest features on the record, which, you know, I mean, especially considering what I said in the last video, that came as a bit of a shock to me. But then I heard Outkast after this, and everything was all good. But yeah, man, I mean, this really is such a monumental debut record. He, you know, recaptured those old sounds that, you know, made the 1970s soul music so great. He contemporized them and really made them accessible for a new age of people and a new generation listening to this type of music. And it's just such a beyond a brilliant record when it comes to songwriting and just musical excellence. So yeah, really, if you guys haven't checked out Channel Orange, you gotta listen to this record. Just absolutely fantastic. And now for number 9. This album is an absolute classic. And you're going to be like, what? If this is at number 9, what could be on the rest of the list? Well, at number 9, I have 21 by Adele. As I said, this was an instant classic when it came out. I mean, and really what Adele did was so groundbreaking for the time. Especially, you know, with the pop charts that were so dominated by like all these new sounds. And here she brings back something so retro, but something so timeless, and songs that are so universal that anybody can relate to, and really broke her out into the forefront of the music industry. There is no doubt about that. I mean, listen to all the songs here. Rolling in the Deep, Rumor Has It, Turnin' Tables, Set Fire to the Rain. I mean, these were huge hits, and all top 10 singles, I'm pretty sure, which is pretty astounding. And I remember in middle school when this came out, I always was playing Minecraft when this was on for some reason. I guess I had my radio on and I was playing it. But I remember the time this came out and how huge Adele was and how sick I was of hearing Someone Like You at the time. But regardless, I mean, just starting off with Rolling in the Deep, one of the greatest songs of all time, and just that bum 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 bum, that palm muted acoustic guitar intro, and then of course you hear it come in. There's a fire starting in my heart, reaching a fever pitch, and it's bringing me out the dark. I mean, if you don't know this song, I mean, I don't know where you've been. I feel like everybody's mother and their mother knows the song. It is just an all-time classic. And just the build on the song until she, you know, especially when you get to that, I think it's like the 3rd or 4th verse where the claps come in, and it's just like, almost, it's basically a gospel song. It's just absolutely incredible, and some of her absolute best songwriting. It's a masterpiece, and that's only the first song on the album. And as I said, I mentioned all those other ones which are lyrically incredible as well. And of course I have to mention tracks like He Won't Go, which is just so great in its own right, a really underrated cut. You know, kind of talking about like sticking with someone through, you know, the highest amount of adversity that you can face, and also indicating drug addiction. She wrote it based on this couple that she knew, and how this woman stuck by her man despite his addictions, and how they kind of conquered through that. It's a beautiful story. So many great tracks on this album, but really the one to me that absolutely is the masterpiece, and that's just also talking about an album that also has Rolling in the Deep on that, and that is Someone Like You, the closing track, one of the best closing tracks to any album in history, not just to the 2010s, just that do 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 do, like that piano arpeggio you hear right at the beginning. You hear it, you know exactly what song you're getting into. But really, I think Adele's absolute magnum opus, just to name one of a few, but really just the lyrics here are like really some Paul McCartney level lyricism, especially, you know, sometimes it lasts in love, but sometimes it hurts instead. Man, I mean, anybody can relate to that statement. It's such a heartbreaking song, one of the most beautiful ballads of all time. And really, I mean, this is just a timeless record, and I think is going to be as such. And I think one of the reasons Adele is one of the artists I love the absolute most coming out of the 2010s. Wasn't a huge fan of her first album, but this really was the definition of avoiding a sophomore slump. One of the best sophomore albums of all time. Might not crack the top 10 because there's so many, but really what a fantastic album. And yeah, I mean, What is next on this list? 21 is this low? Well, I'll get into it in just a second, guys. Because at number 8, I have an underrated album, and one I think should have been on like the best of end of the decades list, and it really was severely passed over by so many publications. But that is Childish Gambino's "Awaken My Love." Really, what a creative 180, especially from his last album, Because the Internet, which I know a lot of people love. I find it quite overrated. It just sounds like mildly, I guess, experimental trap music, which I'm not really a fan of. But this is really not a hip-hop album at all. And really is like just pure, hard funk. With a capital F, right from the beginning of this album, with Me and Your Mama, with the la 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 la, you know, just those vocals coming in, and just a really seductive groove underneath it. He even references Smokey Robinson and the Miracles. You really got a hold on me, kind of like harkening back to those original R&B roots. But really, as this thing goes along, there's so many great songs. There's so much great social commentary, especially on zombies, you know, kind of like talking about culture vultures, and really just kind of like people profiting off of black music. Really interesting song there, and just such a catchy hook on it too. And of course I have to mention the best piece of social commentary on here, Boogie Man, especially that line, "With the gun in your hand, I'm the Boogie Man," talking about police brutality. Man, what a powerful statement if I've ever heard any on that subject. And really just, man, yet again, such another funky song, but one with so much meaning behind it. And then, of course, I mean, kicking off the second side of this album is an absolute classic, Redbone. You know, this is going to be something that people look, you know, years down the line and say, man, that was the shit when it came out. And that's exactly how I felt when I heard the song. It's just like, you know, just, oh man, it just gets you in that bass line. You know, the very sporadic, but just so chilled out. You know, you could smoke a joint to this if you really wanted to. But it is just such a powerful song, and it was used to great effect in Get Out as well. But man, this is just such an all-time classic, I think. And it only came out a few years ago, but I think it is deserving of the accolade. And then you have crazy stuff on here, like California, where he's auto-tuning the hell out of his voice. He's like, California! And it's just absolutely nuts. And it's one of those songs where it's like, yeah, I'm not usually a huge fan of auto-tune, but like when it's used in such a wacky context, and just his vocal delivery on the song is absolutely absurd, and you have like boing, you have these sounds going off that are just so unkiltered, and really just makes the track so much more interesting. Really one of the craziest cuts on here, but I absolutely love it. And then you have Terrified, where he's like being scared of commitment, but also trying to like latch onto this girl because she's the one from him. And then that leads right into Baby Boy, which really is an open letter to his son about how much he loves him, and you know, the fact that, you know, even though he's not with his mother, it's like, don't make that seem like I think any less of you, or, you know, like that you aren't so loved by me, which I think is so beautiful, because it really becomes a concept album at that point, and you realize that this whole album, at least in parts, is a letter to his baby boy. And that song leads so perfectly into The Night That Me and Your Mama Met, which is an instrumental track with the guitar played by Gary Clark Jr. And really, it's absolutely wordless, but I don't think you need any words, because it tells you everything you need to know about that night, just through the musicality of it. Absolutely beautiful, beautiful track, and especially that leading into Stand Tall. What a brilliant, brilliant closer to this album. So beautiful, easily the standout on here after Redbone, but really just such a I think the only thing with this album that I really have to knock it down for just a little bit is the production. It's not always mixed. Some of the I guess some of the vocals are mixed a little low, and it doesn't really sound that great 100% of the time when you're really trying to like listen to the vocals, because the lyrics are very important. But other than that, I mean, the soundscape he creates, just bringing it back to that 1970s funk, it is just, you just want to relish in it and live inside these soundscapes for as long as you can, as long as this is playing. And really, this makes me love Childish Gambino, even though I'm not really a huge fan of a lot of his other stuff, because I think he's one of the most interesting, one of the most boldest artists, you know, to do something like Because the Internet and then do this, an album later. It's pretty risky move, but obviously it paid off for him in dividends. And I also think that he's just, Donald Glover in general is like one of the most talented guys in the industry, and really one of the people I look up to the most, because he writes, he acts, he makes music, he does stand-up, and I at least want to do 3 of those things. So really, this album is so underappreciated. It was nominated for a Grammy for Album of the Year, not that that matters, but you know, it absolutely is a classic, I think, or at least an underappreciated one. So I'm sure a lot of you have heard this, but please, if you haven't already, go check this out. This is just a phenomenal, phenomenal record. So, at number 7 on this list, we have an absolute hip-hop classic, or just classic in general, but really one of the most, I guess, cohesive concept albums, one of the most powerful to ever exist, and that is Good Kid, Mad City by Kendrick Lamar. His sophomore, not his debut album, but really, this is just such a great, and obviously this album cover, at least this version of it, has been memed to death. I love the one that say, hey, check out my new whip, and it's just the album cover to Good Kid, Mad City. It's just so great. But regardless, I mean, this is really what put Kendrick right at the top, and deservedly so. I mean, just the way this is, you know, basically a autobiographical tale about Kendrick's life in Compton and growing up in the hood, and the people he was around and the stuff he got into, a lot of bad things. Especially, you know, and I love how this is structured too, because you have Bitch Don't Kill My Vibe, where he's being very braggadocious, or you know, The Art of Freestyle, where he's being very braggadocious in the car with his friends. So when I first heard it, it's like, oh, this is just like, you know, all the rap music where it's like, oh, you know, I think so highly of myself, all that sort of stuff. But then you realize that he's putting on this facade, and he's trying to show off for these guys. And this album also has some really, some of the funniest skits I've ever heard, you know, kind of connecting it, these voicemails from Kendrick's mom, kind of checking up on him, seeing if he's okay, and then his dad in the background yelling about, he's like, where are my dominoes at? You're like, what? He's like trying to find his dominoes. It is just so funny, but really, as it goes along, obviously, the voicemails get much more deep, and that's the thing I love about this album, is how cinematic it is. I mean, really, this, you could consider this cinema, I guess audio cinema. It's just absolutely incredible the way Kendrick crafts a story through his raps. And then of course you get into like Money Trees and like all the stuff where they start delving into that crime, and you see Kendrick just torn at his core, because he is the good kid in the Mad City, as the title would suggest, and it's him trying to overcome all the pressures that the ghetto is kind of presenting in front of him. And it's like, how does he come out a better man? How does he become a man in this environment that is just so kind of, you know, I guess inundated with all this violence, all this, you know, kind of gang affiliation. And it also just creates for some of the most introspective songs on any of his records, like Swimming Pools, which is absolutely amazing. But really, to me, one of Kendrick's best songs on here, Sing About Me, I'm Dying of Thirst. You know, I won't spoil it too much, but kind of talking to a friend and kind of like, I guess, trying to like make him immortal in his music. It is just such a beautifully heartbreaking song, which leads into Real, where Kendrick's kind of, reckoning with who am I really, like, is this all this sort of affiliation, is this really me, is this who I want to be, and then him coming out on the end victorious as a human being, but also on Compton with Dr. Dre, of all people. I mean, probably Compton's biggest legend in the music industry, and just how he's like embracing the city in which he came from, but also coming out of it a better man. I mean, there are no weak tracks on this thing at all. Kendrick is rapping his ass off. I mean, come on, you listen to this and you're like, yeah, he's one of the greatest MCs of all time, and easily one of the greatest hip-hop artists, and really, I think, far and above all his peers from his era, but really, this was just a stepping stone, towards, I mean, even greater success, which we might get into a little bit down the line in this episode. But really, one of the strongest concept albums, as I said, of all time, and really such a classic in its own right. And now for my number 6, and I believe the most recent entry on this list, was an album that came out a few years ago that absolutely changed the game in pop music. Really, I've been talking about how generic, really more specifically like synth pop and trap sounds to me. And, listening to that, kind of dominate the airwaves, I was really, hoping to hear some creative, some unique voice within that kind of realm, especially pop. And then comes along these two siblings on their debut album, which was made in a small bedroom. You guys know what I'm talking about. Of course, that is When We All Fall Asleep, Where Do We Go by Miss Billie Eilish. I'm sure you know by now, I'm quite a fan of Billie Eilish. I mean, if you haven't even seen my thesis film, it was basically based around her. But yes, I mean, once I finally heard this album, I didn't really get what everybody was talking about with Billie Eilish, but to be fair, I didn't really hear it that much, or really took the time out of, my day to go and listen to it. But really, I was like, I should listen to Bad Guy, and I was like, there's something really, really cool about the song, and really, I think it was the production that Phineas did, and really, I mean, what an incredible producer, one of the best in the game right now, and I think he could go on to be considered one of the best of all time. But just the way he creates these soundscapes that sound like nothing I've ever heard, especially in pop music. The really unconventional use of certain loops that he finds, like the beat. One of the beats on Bad Guy, he was going through an airport in Australia, and kind of like this gate you pass through was going off. He's like, I should record it, and then he looped it onto the album. And it's like, where did he come up with this? But he's really just, an engineer, a really just humble and an incredibly talented one at that. But let's talk about his sister here, who's really the star of the show. One of the most unique voices in pop music ever. Just those really low tones that she sings, almost not quite whispering, but really, really slight and very quaint. And I don't mean that in a bad way, because she can also belt, as we know. But really, Bad Guy was the breakout hit, and I don't even think it's the best song on this album, but it really is a classic. When you look at pop music, it was such a game changer when that came out. And just the way, I'm the bad guy, whatever Phineas does on her vocals, it just sounds like they're trickling down. It's just incredible. But man, there's so many mind-blowing songs on here. Zanny is one that really gets to me, because not only does it take the thickness of some really great trap beats that you might hear, but it also presents these harmonies that are really Beach Boys level. And obviously I don't like throwing that out, But really, these harmonies, these song structures, they're so intricate, they're so well composed, they're so surprising, they're so subversive, and this is why I love listening to music like this. There's so much musicality here. This isn't just sounds for the sake of it. Obviously, it's very groundbreaking in that sense, but there's also so much weight on here, especially on Xanny. I mean, it's an anti-drug song, you know, her watching her friends get high on Xanax, and she's just like, I don't get the appeal, I'd rather be sober. And she's like, I love that line where it's like, I'd rather not be kissing someone who will drown in Silver Lake, or, you know, something along those lines. But really, such a beautiful song, and the vocal panning on her voice, I don't need a Xanny to feel better. Like, it's just absolutely mind-blowing once again. The production from Finneas, just top to bottom here, is just flawless. And there really is not a weak track on this entire album. And the ones I don't love, even You Should See Me in a Crown and All the Good Girls Go to Hell, are still really, really good songs. But really, there's so many great standouts on here. The one track that was solely penned by Finneas, When the Party's Over, is just one of the most beautiful ballads in Billy's discography. And just very, very subdued. Of course, there's some moments that are a bit bombastic here and there, but really just such a beautiful introspective ballad that you can really soak into. And then of course you have just lyrical exercises that are just so amazing, like Wish You Were Gay, where she's basically talking about this guy who doesn't give her a whole lot of attention, saying, you know, I wish you were gay so that way, like, I wouldn't be offended by you, like, kind of throwing me off to the side. But this song is just the lyrical precision on here, the way they play with numbers, the way the song is structured. You know, I love that it's like, I ate alone at 7, you were 6 minutes away, stuff like that. And yet another great example, if 3's a crowd, then 2 is us, 1 slipped away. I mean, oh my goodness. And just the way the melody just flows along so seamlessly with it. I mean, it is just absolutely incredible exercise in writing. It reminds me of something like Here, There, and Everywhere. Which, yet again, is not a compliment I like to throw out too much, but I just think the lyrics are brilliant on this album. And then, of course, you have songs that are just absolute bangers, like Bury a Friend, that really just has that thick bass on it, and just such a powerful beat underneath it. The what do you want from me? Why don't you run from me? What are you wondering? What do you know? I mean, it just obviously has the title of the song in there. And I think the most impressive part of this album is the ending suite, starting with Listen Before I Go, which is kind of like talking about suicide. And really, I mean, at this point in time, Billy was in a very, very dark place. And that comes out in the lyrics and the way that segues into I Love You, which, oh my goodness, that might be my favorite Billie Eilish song. I don't know, that or My Future is like neck and neck. But the ascending intervals on the pre-chorus, the baby won't you take me back, just say you're trying to make me laugh, and nothing has to change today. Didn't mean to say I love you. I mean, it is just so beautiful, and the lyrics on here, you can just picture this very intimate moment, maybe one that was just a little bit too revealing, but really one that's just so earnest. And I mean, really, it is an incredible, incredible piece of work. And then, of course, you get to Goodbye, which really ties together all the musical motifs that you see from all these songs together, and did successfully what Queen tried to do on their albums in the 70s and failed extremely hard at. But really, it just adds so much cohesion to this album, and most of these tracks flow seamlessly into one another to begin with. And so yeah, it's just such a brilliant way to put her mark on the music industry. And really, I'm going to say it, one of the greatest debut albums of all time. Yes, I would put it up there with the best of them. Not quite to this level, but, you know, Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. I mean, really, yeah, it deserves to be in that conversation. Really, I've been searching for something like this for so long when it comes to mainstream pop, and as soon as I heard this album, I fell in love with Billie Eilish and her music. It is just incredible what was achieved here. Obviously, you know, won Grammy for Album of the Year, deservedly so in that case, and broke her out to superstardom if she wasn't a star already. This is such a monumental album, and I think one that people are going to look back on and say, that was one of the most influential albums of its era. Nothing sounds like this, and there's going to be a lot of people who try to make albums that sound like this, but I don't think they're ever going to be as good. And just starting off in the beginning with exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. What a title. But just the way it's like, I've taken out my Invisalign. Here's the album. You know, like, in some sense, they're not taking themselves too seriously. They're going to have fun on this record. I think it shows you somewhat of the mentality going into this record, but really kind of what they wanted to give their audience. But yeah, this really is such an achievement, and really one that's going to be hard to top. I love this album. Yeah, I mean, what else can I say about it? It's going to be a classic. And speaking of classics, rounding out the top 5, we have My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy by, of course, Kanye West. This album is mind-blowingly good. Really one of the best produced albums of all time. Maximalist production at its finest. Kanye went over and above on this one, and it shows completely. I mean, especially the features on here. You got Kid Cudi, you got Raekwon, and of course, I mean, I'll get into some other ones a little bit later, but he threw everything at the kitchen sink for this one. And as much as I say a lot of times in rap music where I don't like the very braggadocious sort of songs, here Kanye is indulging in his ego and his dark desires, his sexual fantasies, everything, you know, him talking about what the rich life is like, but it's all presented in such an interesting way, and I think it's because of the musicality of it all, the samples he uses. Just as I said, the production, the orchestration is just so powerful, almost overwhelming, but really never gets in the way of what Kanye is doing or anybody else on this record is doing. And obviously, I mean, you have so many classics on here, like Power, which obviously samples 21st Century Schizoid Man by King Crimson so beautifully, and just that ho ho, hey, ho ho. I mean, everybody knows this song. It was such a big hit on the radio when it came out, and of course, All the Lights, you know, just such a great song. And I mean, the lyrics kind of manifesting themselves today, so that's kind of scary, but such a great track. And I mean, obviously you had Rihanna on there. Elton John was even providing vocals. That shows you like how above and beyond he went when it came to all the features on here, but they all work so well. And then of course, I mean, I gotta talk about the elephant in the room, or should I say the monster in the room, which is just such a monumental track, Monster. I mean, really have Bon Iver, Rick Ross, Jay-Z, Nicki Minaj, who, I mean, say what you will about her, absolutely kills her verse on this song. And just such a fun track, and has some of Kanye's funniest lyrics, like, have you ever had sex with a pharaoh and put that pussy in a sarcophagus? It is just, oh my goodness, I love this song so much. One of the standouts on this album, which is saying quite a bit, because you also have so many wonderful tracks on here. Like, I really do love Hell of a Life, which, you know, sampled Iron Man, but really is probably the most explicit song on here. But I think the melody works so well, playing into that crazy night in Vegas, I can only presume. But, you know, it doesn't just stop there. Like, there are some really introspective songs, some of which we already mentioned, but ones that I think make this album relatable to at least some degree, because a lot of this you can't really relate to, because it's Kanye just in his own world and presenting his own worldview to us. But really, I mean, Runaway. I mean, come on, it's one of Kanye's best songs. As soon as you hear that, like, single piano chord, dun, dun, and, you know, just the way it goes down, and really one of his most self-reflective, you know, and I think Kim should have listened to this song and knew what she was getting into, because he was telling everybody right there, you know, baby, I got a plan, run as fast as you can. man, it is just so heartbreaking, and really one of the few times that Kanye really breaks down his own ego and his own personality. But also, Blame Game featuring John Legend is yet again, I think, really on the same level as Runaway, standing as one of his most introspective songs, and oddly enough has a feature from Chris Rock, who didn't put anybody's wife's name in his mouth at that time, but really such a powerful, powerful track. I mean, I could go on and on about this thing, how groundbreaking it is for pop music, especially coming out right at the turn of the decade, 2010 to be exact. And man, everybody has talked about this album to death. I don't know what else more I can add talking about it, but Kanye is one of the all-time greats, and I think that after Late Registration, in my opinion, this is his greatest achievement. And if you didn't think we were talking about some of the all-time best albums, here is where we get to La Crème à la Crème. I mean, this is really some of the best to ever have been made. And at number 4, I am talking about really the greatest EDM album of all time, and that is Random Access Memories by the robotic duo Daft Punk. Really, I mean, this, man, is just absolutely insane. And just the fact that they took their influences from Michael Jackson, Fleetwood Mac, that era of the late 1970s, disco, soft rock, and really did it better than all of them, if I'm being completely honest with you. Yeah, I mean, this is just absolutely incredible. Almost every single track on here is killer. And really, they don't necessarily completely reinvent the wheel when it comes to the style, but in some ways they really do, because they take their electronic influences and put it here, and really shows that they weren't just making electronic beats. These guys were studio perfectionists, and it comes out in the music, especially the fact that there's some orchestration on it. Obviously there's a lot of live instrumentation, especially for electronic album, but really, I mean, it sounds like a Max Steiner score at one point, which they also cited as one of their influences for this album. And really kicking this off with Give Life Back to Music, which I think is a statement that I've been going on about for a while, and one I can get behind. Really sets you into that disco sort of sound that you're going to get from this. But then, of course, you have songs like The Game of Love, which you get those iconic Daft Punk vocoder vocals just singing through just this very, very introspective and really somber song about love. And then they even top it, a song later or so with Within, which features this very beautiful acoustic piano intro. And then slowly as it goes along, you get these layers of synth and these really just fine-tuned just drum brushes in the background, and has one of the most beautiful melody lines on any Daft Punk song, or any song in general. That I've been for some time looking for someone I need to know now. Please tell me who I am. I mean, it is just such a beautiful song. One of the standouts on a record full of them. And then, of course, you have Julia Casablancas from The Strokes on here on Instant Crush. Putting his voice through the vocoder, kind of making him a part of their world, but still sounding like the Julian Casablancas that we all know from The Strokes. And just such a wonderful track. And really the grooves on here are killer. And of course you have Lose Yourself to Dance, which is the first feature from Pharrell Williams on this thing, which is really, really good. And of course the panning that takes place in the song, especially when they add each layers of the song on the chorus, with the Daft Punk vocals, come on, come on, come on, come on, come on, and then it comes in the other ear, and then just Pharrell singing over it. Just absolutely incredible. And of course, we got to talk about just the absolute instant classic when it came out, Get Lucky, which I think is Daft Punk's easily their best song, though Harder, Better, Faster, Stronger is definitely a close second. But really just that. She's up all night to the sun. I'm up all night to get some. She's up all night for good fun. I'm up all night to get lucky. I mean, it is just such one of the catchiest songs ever written. An earworm if I've ever heard one. Absolute classic, absolute masterpiece. But of course you have just even more great track. Also, Giorgio by Moroder, which was sandwiched between The Game of Love and Within, which is a tribute to, of course, Giorgio Moroder, who even talks over the track, and it's like him talking about how he started making music and how he started his career with like these sounds playing over it, and kind of like he's like, and then I made this beat, and then the beat comes in. It is just an incredible exercise in studio professionalism. It really just an incredible track and a great tribute to Moroder there. But of course you also have Touch, which features Paul Williams, legendary songwriter, with this beautiful orchestration and a choir, which sounds like it was pulled from You Can't Always Get What You Want by the Rolling Stones. It is just incredible how much diversity is on this record. There's so many other mind-blowing tracks on here, especially the closing one, which is Contact, which they're like blasting off in a spaceship, and the sound gets all washed out and really intense and very, very gritty. And I mean, it is just such a powerful way to close the record in a beautiful cacophony of sound. And really, I think this goes to show just how great these guys were, and the fact that they broke up really shows to me it was more about the music than it ever was about the fame or the money. That's why they had the robot helmets. They didn't want to really show them their true selves. But this is one of the greatest final albums in anybody's discography. That is, if Daft Punk doesn't get back together. But I think if they ended on this, it would be the perfect way to end their career. What an artistic statement, and really one that I feel is, kind of a concept album about, I mean, obviously these robots, they're kind of devoid of feeling, trying to reach out for connection, and looking back on, nostalgia, which really, I mean, features nostalgic sounds from that classic era of the late 70s, early 80s. They wear their influences on their sleeves, and then they completely make it their own and shoot it into the stratosphere. Random Access Memories is one of the greatest albums of all time. And yeah, it's too bad to see them go, but let's just be happy for the music they did give us, because we got this right here and we can't complain about that one bit. And now for number 3. Guys, you knew this album was coming. I don't think any top 10 of the 2010s list is complete without this record. To Pimp a Butterfly by Kendrick Lamar. The second appearance of Kendrick Lamar on this list, the only artist to actually have more than one album from this decade make my list. But guys, this is one of the greatest artistic achievements in human history. And it's only number 3. So I think that tells you how great the best albums of this decade were. In this one, I mean, really, just look at this album cover. It's iconic already. One of the greatest album covers of all time. Tells you everything you need to know about this record and the contents without having to hear a word. And really, maybe, I think, the most brilliant concept album ever. I'm not saying it's better than something like The Dark Side of the Moon, right? But I think when it comes to execution of said ideas in said concept, this doesn't do it like no album does it better than this. And I say this because Dark Side of the Moon has a couple of instrumentals on there, like Any Color You Like. But this really, yeah, not every single track I love, but every track has meaning. And the thing that is so amazing about this record that nobody had ever done up to this point is when Kendrick will finish a song, he'll start this poem starting with I Remember You Was Conflicted. And as he goes on each song, he adds on more words to the poem, and every statement he ends off on leads into the themes of the next song. It is so beyond brilliant. And just starting this thing off with Wesley's theory, where he's basically talking about how a lot of black men specifically come into all this money and then lose it all, you know, by, you know, whether it be, you know, being audited by the IRS. He's like, you know, obviously because he's talking about Wesley Snipes, and really, really interesting ideas. Racially charged ideas that not a lot of people really, I don't think it wasn't really on my radar that this was an issue that some black men of high, you know, status had to deal with. But just, I mean, the production is so funky. It's so, I mean, you got George Clinton on here from Funkadelic right off the bat, and Thundercat on the bass. I mean, really, that's how you know this is going to be one hell of a record. And then, of course, it goes into For Free, which is this really, really jazzy interlude. And he's just rapping over it like, "This dick ain't free. You acting like walking around and ain't got a receipt." And he just starts rattling off. And you're like, how is he even, like, putting all these words together and making such a concise statement? And how is he rapping over something that jazzy? What? It's absolutely insane. And just to hear how, like, he's talking about, like, this, creating this analogy, or well, I should say a metaphor, how this girl, you know, keeps using him for sex. He's saying this dick ain't free, but then he's also talking about how slaves were raped on the plantations. I mean, it is just incredible, the amount of layers to the songwriting here. And then, of course, you got King Kunta, which has one of the hardest beats I've ever heard in my life. And, of course, that hook on the chorus, "Bitch, where were you when I was walking? Now I run the game, got the whole world talking King Kunta." I mean, it is so catchy. I mean, this, you can't help but, like, wanna, like, groove to this song. It has such a great groove, but also has a great message, once again, as all these songs do. And then you get Institutionalized, which has Bilal and Snoop Dogg, whose verse on this is so killer, but like talking about, you know, kind of like the people he grew up with, and you know, like taking them to the BET Awards and them kind of acting a little wild and unruly, and just talking, you know, and obviously Bilal, you know, is like guising as his grandmother, using that like really, you know, kind of weary voice, saying shit don't change until you get up and wash your ass, which I think is really such a profound statement. You know, he's like trying to stay true to his homies, but he's also trying to grow into something, you know, better than them, more mature. And of course, I mean, just the symbolic meanings and layers of these songs, especially These Walls, where he relates the sexual encounter he has with this woman, using his power to kind of get into the sexual encounter in the first place, and talking about how if these walls could talk, you know, he's like talking about the walls of the bedroom, and then he talks about her, you know, baby daddy who's in prison, and he's talking about these walls. I mean, it is just beyond brilliant and brutal social criticisms that I don't think any artist has ever hit on harder or more precisely than Kendrick has. And then, of course, you have the ever so powerful You. I mean, really, this to me is one of Kendrick's most impressive songs lyrically and just vocally, because he's rapping about all of the self-hate he has for himself, regretting there not being for his friend, and just really, and you get these like sounds of the bottle being like thrown on the ground, you know, him drinking himself and dealing with this pain, and just he's like almost crying at one point, or he is crying on record, and it's so powerful because you feel his genuine self coming through the song and all that pain he's experienced. And then that leads right into All Right, which, I mean, come on, this is like an all-time classic, really. Not even my favorite on this album, but it really has become a modern-day civil rights anthem, and it's just crazy how much power this song has gained. You know, obviously, you know, the line, "And we hate po-po, wanna shoot us dead in the street for sure." It's just such a powerful track, talking about, you know, black unity and power. It's just absolutely incredible. And then, of course, you get so much stuff on here, like, right after that, like for Sale, which, you know, kind of brings back the motifs from, the musical motifs, I should say, from Wesley's Theory. And then, of course, it goes on. You got so many great songs. How Much a Dollar Costs, where he sees this homeless dude and he, like, debates whether giving him $1 or not and decides it's not the right thing to do, and then that man ends up being God, and it's kind of like this reckoning he has with himself. And then you have Complexion, a Zulu Love, featuring Rhapsody, who has such a killer verse on here, and also The Blacker the Berry, which are just two such powerful black power anthems. It really is just incredible, the statements being made on here. And then, of course, as the list goes on, you know, You Don't Gotta Lie, Mama Said, is really such a powerful track as well. And I think, you know, really brings the whole thing together, especially the fact he recorded this live, and then he started talking to these guys fighting in the crowd about, you know, kind of like, we shouldn't be, you know, fighting with each other, you know, we need to, you know, band together and fight the powers that oppress us. It's such a powerful track. And then, of course, one of the greatest tracks in the history of hip-hop, closing out this thing with Mortal Man, which I think it's 16 minutes long, but man, is it powerful. And just, you finally see the poem come to fruition in its full extent, and it is just one of the most beautiful things I have ever heard in my life. And really, this song also has one of the most impressive feats of editing in any song in history. The fact that he's talking to Tupac, I mean, that is just so mind-blowing, especially how seamlessly Kendrick's dialogue with him fits. It really sounds like he's talking to Tupac Shakur. I mean, it is just unbelievable, and how the parallels to what Tupac believed in and how that influenced Kendrick and what he learned, because really this whole album is about self-discovery, learning what it means to be a man, specifically a black man in the United States, and how to unite people, you know, staying true to the people who made you, and also becoming better, you know, something more enlightened. It's a powerful, powerful journey of self-discovery, and really just one of the most racially charged albums of all time, that really makes some of the most profound statements I've ever heard about race. And I really think anybody, I mean, whether you agree with the politics or not, you should listen to this album, because it is an absolute masterpiece in recording. It is unbelievable that he was able to come up with something so articulate and so precise. But then again, we shouldn't be surprised. This album right here proves to me that Kendrick is peerless. He is way beyond everybody who, you know, really came out in the past decade. And I really think an iconic hip-hop figure. I think he's one of the greatest hip-hop artists of all time, right under Kanye West. Nobody is even on his level, and I can't wait for his new album. I hope it drops this year, because you know it's going to come out, and it's going to be the best album of the year. But really, Kendrick is one of the all-time greats, and I think that this album is something, with even being released for 7 years, everybody has talked about being one of the greatest achievements in music history. And that's only at my number 3, so what could be next on this list? So, with Kendrick only being at 3, you guys are scratching your heads, I get it, but once you hear what 2 is, you'll understand, because this album wasn't even recorded in the 2010. Haha, psych! No, but really, this album, really probably the most legendary unreleased album of all time, maybe the most bootlegged album of all time, until it was actually released, the sessions to these recordings in 2011. And of course, what I'm talking about is the Smile Sessions by the Beach Boys. Really think about what would have happened if this came out in 1967. It would be unfathomable how much this would have changed the landscape of music. This is one of my top 10 favorite albums of all time, too, just throwing it out there. This thing is a musical opus. It's just absolutely masterful, because obviously Brian Wilson was just coming off of Pet Sounds, and, you know, obviously that is one of the greatest albums of all time, as I've talked about in my top 10 albums of the 60s. But you know, he was really at his musical peak, you know, his skills as a composer, as a songwriter. He had never been on a higher playing field than this. Really, you know, on the same level as the Beatles. Then he came to these sessions, and there were so many problems. The label wanted them to hurry up and get this product out, but Brian was taking his time, being the perfectionist that he is. And of course, then once he started recording, this is when he was really deep into that drug use with the LSD and all that stuff. And he started having mental breakdowns, and the album was just shelved, and they never released it. And these songs on here were released sporadically through their 60s and 70s albums on their output. But you know, it's such a shame, because this is really one of those what could have been, you know, but yet we get to hear it in its full splendor, because this really does basically feel like a complete album. So conceptual. Of course, the contributing lyricist Van Dyke Parks, who obviously wrote with Brian on Pet Sounds, you got his lyricism here, and this really is Brian Wilson's quest for, you know, Americana, and trying to define what that means, because obviously the Beatles were British, as we know, and he was trying to make something so distinctly American that would set them apart from their contemporaries. And basically, you know, just the way this music flows in together. I mean, this is a composer at his absolute peak of his powers. I mean, really, in some ways, this is more groundbreaking than Pet Sounds. It's crazy to say that, but really, just the way these tracks flow into each other, especially starting off with Our Prayer, which is almost like a Gregorian-esque choir piece and arrangement, which later appeared on their album 3030, I believe it's called. And yeah, so basically this is such a beautiful way, the way he plays with the harmonic structure of this. And of course that segueing into G and Heroes and Villains, which is one of the absolute best Beach Boys songs ever. I've been in this town so long that back in the city. And I always picture that scene in Fantastic Mr. Fox where they're running across the farm. But this song, it really has so many elements of like ragtime, and obviously the signature barbershop quality of the Beach Boys harmonies, but it's experimenting so much with horns and orchestration, and really a lot of dissonant string sounds, which could be, you know, kind of contributed to, you know, A Day in the Life. But then again, I mean, this was recorded before Sgt. Pepper came out, so whatever. The Beach Boys and the Beatles are doing very similar things, but this is an absolute classic, easily one of the best tracks on this album. And that, of course, goes into Plymouth Rock Roll Over, which is just another phenomenal track, and just a continuation of the musical themes already set up, and kind of like settling, you know, in America, continuing the sort of quest for Americana, if you will. And of course, you have the old master, You Are My Sunshine, a minor version of it sung by Dennis Wilson, which is really, really haunting, and adds a lot to the record. And of course, Cabin Essence, which is talking about like the Asian immigrants working on the railroad, with that beautiful doing, 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 you know, like those it's so bizarre, but it works so well. And it feels like a Western, really. In the same way Heroes and Villains feels like a Western song. And of course you have other great tracks like Wonderful and Child is the Father of the Man, which features this kind of all these parts coming in from all the Beach Boys, blending together, and then as the song goes along, the mix gets really, really fuzzed out and trippy, and it sounds like you're tripping on acid almost. I mean, it is just incredible to listen to. And of course, one of Brian Wilson's best ballads, Surf's Up. So beautiful that it was included on an album of the same name a few years down the line. Just an absolute standout track. But I just think like the instrumentation here is absolutely insane. I've already mentioned like all the horns and stuff. He's working with the Wrecking Crew again. But really, to me, one of the big standouts instrumentally is Vegetables, which he's using carrots as a percussion instrument. Eating carrots. Like, who would have ever thought that would have been something that was utilized? I mean, it is just absolutely insane, and really one of the trippiest one of the most memorable songs on the entire album. And then there's other great songs on here, like Wind Chimes is just so ethereal in its execution and in musical composure. But also you have The Elements, Fire, or Mrs. O'Leary's Cow, which is so scary to listen to. And this is the song that really put Brian over the edge, because he was recording this song, obviously it's called Fire, and then there was fires that started not too far away from the studio where they're at, and he was like, I can't do this, and I think that was part of the reason they shelved this, because he was convinced that he had manifested. I mean, crazy stories what happened here, but that really shows you the mental state that Brian Wilson was in at this time, unfortunately. But man, I mean, this all culminates into maybe their greatest musical masterpiece, at least from a compositional standpoint, and that's Good Vibrations. I mean, you guys know the song. Come on, it has been out since the 60s. It is just absolutely a magnum opus. And just the harmonies, the song structure, the Beach Boys never did anything like this or ever topped the results of this after the fact. I just love Carl Wilson's vocals on this, and of course that breakdown, the gotta keep those 11 good vibrations a happening with her. Really, and of course the Wrecking Crew does their absolute best. And if you guys haven't seen Love and Mercy, I love the scene where they're recording this, where he's in the studio with Carol Kay and Hal Blaine. I mean, it's just absolutely brilliant. But yeah, I mean, this album is such... really shows that Brian Wilson is like the greatest composer in contemporary pop music, and shows what this would have sounded like if it came out in 1967. It's just unbelievable, and I really, especially talking about Heroes and Villains again, crazy that Jimi Hendrix said that it was just like psychedelic barbershop, and I love Jimi Hendrix, but he was wrong about that. I mean, it is that, but it was very dismissive, and really... it has stood the test of time as something truly brilliant. This is truly work of art on the level of something like Sgt. Pepper or Pet Sounds even. I do think Pet Sounds is a bit better and more universal, but really, I don't know how you can't listen to this and not think it's a musical masterpiece. Really sad that we waited this long to get it, but I'm so glad we have it now for us to enjoy on streaming platforms. But I really want to find the vinyl of this, because it is so hard to find, and it's like at $200. It's ridiculous on Amazon. And so if any of you find this is a request I'm going to ask my viewers here. If any of you find a copy of the Smile Sessions on vinyl, let me know, and if you can hook me up, I will do you a big favor, so please help me out with this one, will you? I would greatly appreciate it. But even so, I mean, this is one of the greatest musical opuses of all time, and really one of the finest works, and not just Brian Wilson's career, but anybody's. So, if the Beach Boys are at 2 and Kendrick Lamar is at 3, I mean, what could be number 1? You guys are probably wondering. I mean, I keep surprising the hell out of all of you, or at least I hope. Maybe some of you. But at number 1, I have an album that is really, really special to me. Not for any particular reason, but really just because I think it's amazing. And it is one of the 5 albums that I would give a 10 out of 10 to. And really, so it's top 5 albums of all time for me. This is, a heavy hitter in my book. And really, I just think one of the greatest achievements in American music. It is unbelievable. And of course, that is this behemoth I have right next to me. And that is the original cast soundtrack to Hamilton by Lin-Manuel Miranda. And I know some of you are probably getting really mad about this, or think, oh, Hamilton's so overrated. But listen, hear me out. Obviously, this blew up like no other musical ever has in Broadway history. But really, what is so powerful and so genius about it is Lin-Manuel Miranda's sense of, musical knowledge and His use of motifs on here is just incredible, especially how he introduces these characters. Like, you got the famous Aaron Burr, Sir, or Alexander Hamilton. And the way he'll seamlessly weave these into the narrative of the story and these songs is absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, you guys got to realize from a compositional standpoint how hard that is to execute, and execute it well. And that's what he does here. I mean, this really puts Tommy in the dirt. I'm sorry, Pete. This really is just unbelievable what he comes up with here. And yeah, my only thing with this album, and it's not enough to knock it down, is every song ends on like dun, like a piano note ending. So yeah, I mean, technically this album is not better than To Pimp a Butterfly or better than the Smile Sessions. But listen, there's 46 songs on this thing, and every one of them serves a purpose to the story, and I think every single one of them is great. I think it's kind of weird that they took one song out, but it really doesn't affect the narrative while you're listening to this record. And that's the other thing with a lot of musical recordings. You get a lot of, fragmentation in the story because a lot of, this stuff is spoken in the show, but Hamilton is one of those things where it's all sung and it's all rapped. So you get everything here basically. And of course, I'm not going to go over all 46 tracks, but obviously the highlights, the opener, Alexander Hamilton, which sets the whole show off, and just so brilliant. I could, sing to this one word for word a while back, and just that Alexander Hamilton, it is just such a powerful theme. And then of course, I mean, My Shot is another one I just absolutely loved her rap to, and just an absolutely brilliant track on this. And you got lyrical references on here, like on 10 Dual Commandments is, basically an interpolation of 10 Crack Commandments by the Notorious B.I.G. And then you listen to something like, You'll Be Back, which, I mean, Jonathan Groff absolutely kills as the king. And if you've seen the recorded version of it on Disney Plus, I mean, just amazing performance. But that almost sounds like Daydream Believer by the Monkees. So you got a lot of interesting influences coming into this product. But just the way it portrays, these historical events with, for the most part, a lot of accuracy. I know a lot of people have stated the whole slave trade thing with Hamilton, how he was an abolitionist who owned slaves. And I wish they had gotten into that in the story, but I'm not going to knock it here because I think this work speaks for itself. And really, I mean, so many beautiful songs on here that are just so emotionally resonant. Of course, the two-song suite that includes Helpless and Satisfied, which set up this, kind of love triangle between Alexander Hamilton and the two Schuyler sisters. Absolutely brilliantly heartwarming, but also heartbreaking at the same time. And of course, I mean, Burn is just another powerful one from Philippa Sue, who plays Eliza Hamilton. And it's just so and watching it on stage is really, I mean, nothing can beat that. And of course, It's Quiet Uptown is another one that is just so deeply emotional and so deeply moving for the narrative of these characters. And of course, I'd be remiss not to mention the ever so catchy The Room Where It Happened, which is really a highlight to, end all highlights on this record, which is not even the best song on the album, in my opinion, because I think Who Lives, Who Dies, Who Tells Your Story, the closer to this show and to this album, is really bringing together all these threads and these characters in the story, and bringing it together in such a powerful and moving conclusion. And really, not saying I cry when I listen to the album, but when I watch the show, this is where the tears start to flow for me. And I think just proves that this is one of the greatest achievements. I mean, what the revisionist take on American history that Lin-Manuel Miranda did with the story, and especially casting minorities in the leading roles as these founding figures in our country's history, is just absolutely phenomenal, kind of reclaiming what was erased from their narrative all these years later. And really, it just, nothing ever comes together this well, at least that I've heard, besides maybe like a few albums, like Dark Side of the Moon or Abbey Road. And then I'm not saying it's technically as good as those. I'm not saying it's technically, better than Pet Sounds either. But what I'm saying is, it is just such a monumental achievement. The fact that this was made, the success that it had. You all know about the popularity of Hamilton if you've been around for the past 5 years or more. But really, I think it is an absolute masterpiece. As I said, a 10 out of 10. Perfect record in my book, besides, slight criticisms that don't really bring down my love for it at all. I just feel so moved even talking about this right now. So if you guys haven't listened to Hamilton yet, I don't know where the hell you've been. You must have been living under a rock or something. But really, this is such an incredible achievement in music, just in general. And really, that ends my series of the top 10 albums from each decade. What a one to end it off on. Hopefully we'll get to do the 20s down the road here, but really, I really appreciate you guys for tuning into this. I had so much fun doing this series, and I'm sorry if some of these run a little long, but I absolutely love talking about music. You know this. This is the channel. If you've seen any of my videos, you know how much of a music head I am. But really, just so glad I could have done this, and so glad that I am going to be doing the top 60 albums of the 60s with my great friend John Stanek of Johnny Radio. So guys, that first episode in that series is going to drop this week, so make sure you subscribe to his channel because it is going to be on his for the first week. But once again, thank you guys for tuning in so much. There's so much great in store. I'm going to do more top 10 music list down the line, so don't think that I'm completely done with this. But I really wanted to get these out to you so you can understand the music that has informed me and informed my taste, and just so you can understand what this channel is all about, at least in part. So thank you guys, and as always, I will see you in the next video.
Tell your story. Who lives, who dies, who tells your story?